Hi everyone, welcome back to another week of Ramban al HaParsha. Mishpatim is always a challenge for us. An insightful person once told me that Mishpatim is where Shnai Mikra goes to die because of the lack of narrative. I do want to come to Ramban at the end today to discuss the narrative and to put everything together because I think the Ramban does an incredible job of doing that. But first is the Parsha, and I want to pick a few examples from the Parsha of the Ramban's insights and understandings. So the Parsha begins with the idea of Eved Ivri, and he has to work 6 years, V'im Adonav Yitein Lo Isha, etc., etc., right? And then the end, V'momar Yomar Ha'eved Ahavti et Adoni et Ishti ve'et Banai Lo Eitzei Chavshi, I don't want to go out, V'higisho Adonav El Elohim, okay, he gets his ear pierced, and he stays till Yovel. A lot to discuss in the Parsha, but I think the most obvious issue is, what's Ha'elokim, or more precisely Ha'elohim? And here the Ramban has a very strong view that comes across in a few places in the Parsha. Maybe we'll look at that, maybe you'll take my word for it. The Ramban starts as follows: V'higisha Adonav el Elohim lebeit din tzarich sheyimlach b'mochrav shemachruhu lo. Okay, if you want to sell a person, you have to go. If you want to keep a person, meaning Beis Din sold him for X number of years, now he's supposed to go free and he wants to stay with his master. So the Ramban says, okay, obviously you go to Beis Din to get his ear pierced because they're the people who sold him. V'amar Rabbi Abraham ki nikru hashoftim Elokim, right? Why are judges called Elohim? What does that have to do with God? That's the name of God. So it says, Shehem mekaimei mishpat ha'elokim ba'aretz. Because the judges act as like agents for God. Okay, so the Torah kind of uses the same word for God to make the point that the judges are acting as God's agents. Now, the Ramban doesn't think, and it's maybe a little bit of a theme today, the Ramban doesn't think that Ibn Ezra is wrong, as he usually does. But he has a better idea. And he says, U'leda'ati yomar ha'katuv v'higisho adonav el ho'elohim, or ad ho'elohim yavod dvar shnehem, another reference to judges, or lirmoz, ki ha'elokim yihiyeh imahem bidvar ha'mishpat. It's not just that they're agents for God. God is with them in the judgment. Hu yatzdik v'hu yarshia. Says the Ramban, it looks like the judges are making the decision, but it's not true. It's God. Hu yatzdik v'hu yarshia. V'zehu sha'amar asher yarshiun elokim. Right, I'm sorry, asher yarshiun Elohim. Because it's the judges, but it's not really the judges. It's really God. V'kach amar Moshe, ki hamishpat le'elokim hu. Right? All judgments are God's. V'kach amar Yehoshaphat, ki lo la'adam tishpetu ki la'Hashem v'imachem b'dvar mishpat. It's God judging. V'chein amar ha'katuv Elokim nitzav ba'adat kel b'kerev Elokim yishpot. Kilomar b'kerev adat Elokim yishpot. Ki ha'elokim hu ha'shofet. Again, the difference being, everybody's on board with the idea that the judges represent God. But the Ramban thinks, no, it's not a metaphor. God is with them, and the judgment that judges who have smicha from Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai, it's God's judgment. V'chein amar v'amdu shnei anashim asher lohem hariv lifnei Hashem. V'zeh tam ki lo atzdik rasha ala perush hanachon. Right, that's a pasuk at the end of this week's parsha. The Ramban says, Ala Perush Hanachon, Ki Lo Atzdik Rasha. See if I can find it very quickly. Chaf Gimel Zayin. There the Torah says, Midvar Sheker Tirchak, V'naki V'tzadik Al Taharog, Ki Lo Atzdik Rasha. I think the Ramban would say, Pshat in that pasuk is, again, it's not a metaphor. Ki Lo Atzdik Rasha. God is saying, if I let a person go free, it's my decision. It looks like it's the judges, but it's really my decision. And therefore, it makes sense to call the judges Elokim because they're acting not as my agents, they're acting through me, or I'm acting through them. Better yet. Okay, and then just finishes, Ve'ele shmot rabba ra'iti ela b'sha'ah shehadayan yoshev v'dan be'emet, kiviyachol maniach hakadosh baruch hu shmei hashamayim umashresh chinato b'tzido shenemar ki ekim Hashem lohem shoftim v'ya Hashem im hashofet. Ramban says it's basically a medrash. The medrash says God is doing it. God is doing it through the shoftim, and therefore we should recognize that when we go to Beis Din and we have a shofet, right? The point of the shofet is that he is God. God is acting through him. You could see this in a number of places in the parsha. You know, in the first Ramban of the Torah, ve'ela mishpatim asher tasim lifnehem. So the Ramban makes the point that ad ho Elohim yavod dvar shnehem v'katuv gam kein v'natan biflilim shehem hadayanim hamumchim hasmuchim ad Moshe Rabbeinu. It's possible nowadays that we don't have real smicha from Moshe Rabbeinu, that God doesn't act through the judges. I don't know, but here the Ramban makes the point. No, he has smicha from Moshe Rabbeinu. Ulekach amar b'kan she'amishpatim ha'eleh yasimu otal lifnei ha'elokim sheyazkir v'lo lifnei kinanim. You can't have Gentiles, and you can't have people who don't have smicha. Okay, l'maisa nowadays nobody has smicha, so maybe we've lost this idea. But ha'elokim, says the Ramban, it is God himself. It is not representatives of God, and that's why the pasuk says, "Ad ha'elokim yavod dvar shnehem," or "V'higisha Adonav el ha'elokim." Okay, that's one halacha that comes up in Mishpatim. Another one, which looks like it's just the regular halacha, but it's really a much bigger deal in Judaism, and that's the pasuk of Ayin Tachas Ayin. First, let's read, and then we'll see what we'll do with it. So the Torah says, "V'imason yevna tata nefesh tachas nafesh." Right? If she dies, two people are fighting, and they hit a pregnant woman. If she dies, somebody's going to pay with their life. And then ayin tachat ayin, shein tachat shein, yad tachat yad, regal tachat regal, etc., going forward. What does the pasuk mean? This, I think, is the most obvious example that people bring when they want to talk about, I don't know, what Chazal do to psukim, that the pasuk says X, but Chazal change it to mean Y. I think that's not true. I think the Ramban says it's not true, but let's see how he handles it. So first of all, let's admit the following. Ayin tachad ayin literally means an eye for an eye, which of course is not the halacha. So the Ramban says, Ayin tachas ayin hayadua b'kabbalat rabotenu shehu mamon. Right? We all know the Kabbalah is, ayin tachas ayin means you pay for the eye. You don't poke a person. If I poke your eye out, you don't poke out my eye. There's nothing to be gained in that. V'yavo kilishon hazeh b'tashlumin. And the Ramban says, but this is how the Torah talks in the context of payments, in the context of tashlumin. So on some level, the Ramban is arguing, on some level, that no, pshuto shel mikra is mamon. Right? The pasuk is clear. You're paying. What are you paying? Nefesh tachas nefesh. But the lashon of tachas works with yishalmena. Okay, the Ramban is quoting the Gemara, thinks that maybe on some level the pasuk should be understood literally. But there are so many other psukim that make it clear that the Torah doesn't mean an eye for an eye, that the Torah means the value of an eye for the value of an eye. And this is an example, right? U'makeh nefesh be'mo yishalmena nefesh tachas nafesh. Yishalmena works with tachas. Now, a complete agreement with the Ibn Ezra, which is rare for the Ramban. Va'amar Rabbi Avraham, ki kavanat hakatuv lomar shehu chayav bekach im lo yitain kofro. Says Rabbi Avraham, on some level, the pasuk is saying, yes, ayin tachas ayin means literally, but you can pay your way out of it. Va'akatuv asar oleinu shelo nikach kofer lenefesh rotzech ashehu rasha lamut. Right? The pasuk is clear, right? V'lo tikchu kofer lenefesh rotzech ashehu rasha lamut. Somebody who's chayiv misa or somebody who's chayiv galus for killing by accident cannot buy his way out of it. Okay, certainly if he's a murderer, he can't buy his way out of it. V'lo tachanif ta'aretz, it would be offensive. But the Ramban, quoting the Gemara in Baba Kama there, makes it clear that he thinks you can't buy your way out of a misa. Aval nikach kofer b'mishu rasha lichrot ever me'evarav. But you can accept payment for somebody who's chayav less than nefesh tachas nefesh, an arm for an arm, an eye for an eye. So on some level, the Ibn Ezra, being quoted by the Ramban, is saying, technically speaking, there's some truth to that ayin tachas ayin is understood literally. However, you can get out of it. You can get out of it by paying. V'lachein lo nichrot oto le'olam, aval yishalem k'mei domyo, or damav. V'im ein lo, yiyeh alav hachov ad shetasig yado v'nigal. So let's say, God forbid, I poked someone's eye out. So Beis Din says to me, well, do you want your eye poked out, or do you want to pay? Right, the 5 things: nezek, sheves, boshes, ripui. I forgot the 5th. Okay, that's the Mishnah in the pays in Baba Kama, right? That a person who damages pays the 5 things that a person has to pay. So you're going to ask the person, do you want? And of course, the person's going to want to pay. No one wants to get their eye poked out. Now, what if he doesn't have the money? So it's a bit of a charade. Okay, so he'll pay it later. He'll carry the debt with him. But exactly what we say you can't do in a case of a capital crime, you do, the Torah wants you to do, with respect to, cutting off a limb, poking out an eye, knocking out a tooth, etc. V'hare'aya l'divrei chachamim ma she'amar lamala. Now the Ramban has another proof. The Torah says, Rak shivto yitain v'rapo yirapeh. Wait, v'rapo yirapeh, what's going on? V'imnase be'ish asher yaket re'ehu kasher asabo. But if you're doing it to somebody whose eye was poked out, ma yishalem acharei kein. V'u gam hu tzarich shevet v'ripui. Right? What does it mean you're going to pay? The guy got his eye poked out. The person who did it got his eye poked out. Why would he pay anything? That's justice. So the answer is, and this I think is a point you see in many, many places, and it really is a pshat, which is, literally, it means ayin tachas ayin. But halacha lemaisa, it doesn't mean ayin tachas ayin. Right? So why does it say that? So first of all, the Rambam in Hilchos Chovel Umazik, in the first parak, says, Ela shehu ra'ui lechasro ever o lachbol bo k'mo she'asa. Now, of course, the Rambam doesn't paskin that way, but the Rambam makes the point. A person who pokes out somebody else's eye deserves to get his own eye poked out. It's not somebody damaged a car, somebody broke a window. Okay, there you have to pay, and you're finished. The Rambam says, no, it's not. If the person isn't mochel you, you're going to carry the aver with you no matter how much you paid. You shouldn't confuse the ability to pay as your punishment with the ability to pay as your kapara. You need kapara for this, whereas you don't need it for a car accident. You don't need it for breaking your neighbor's window. Now, just because I can't resist, okay, so why does the pasuk say it? So first, let's be clear. According to the Rambam, Moshe Rabbeinu heard HaKadosh Baruch Hu say ayin tachas ayin, and he said, oh, I understand. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, no. Ayin tachas ayin means money. And when Moshe Rabbeinu came down from Har Sinai, he told Bnei Yisrael, ayin tachas ayin means money, and there hasn't been anybody who disagreed with that since the beginning of time. Rabbi Eliezer Shita in the Gemara seems to imply otherwise. Okay, we'll leave that as a question. But the bottom line, says the Rambam, says the Sforno, says the Vilna Gaon, that on some level, in an olam of midas hadin, that would have been the halacha. Ayin tachas ayin. You poked out my eye, I poke out your eye. But that didn't work. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world of midas hadin, it didn't work. And then he created the world of midas harachmim, and it didn't work. And he had to be mishatef the two. But the Torah is making clear that on some level, in a world of midas hadin, ayin tachas ayin is the right result. Practically speaking, we can't do it. Practically speaking, there's a million reasons we can't do it. including the Sforno's idea that it's impossible to poke at somebody's eye without risking his death, without risking infection. It's impossible to cut off somebody's arm, to knock at somebody's tooth. So we just, practically speaking, it doesn't work. But whatever I don't think you really need that. I think you need, in the theoretical world, that's the punishment. In the practical world, that's not the punishment. And that's the difference between a capital crime and something less than that. Okay, I think that's the pshat. I think that's interesting. One more specific Ramban before we get to the flow of the parshios. The Torah says as follows. You have to be careful of gerim, right? You have to be careful of converts. Ki gerim heyitem be'eretz Mitzrayim. Because you yourselves were converts in Eretz Mitzrayim. And the Ramban is not exactly sure why that should be. He says, Lo huchsheru kol hagerim ba'avur heyotenu gerim ba'aretz. Right? Just because we were strangers, just because we were foreigners in the land of Egypt, that means that every ger is a wonderful person and deserving of, of our honor and deserving of our best behavior. Ve'ein tam shehiyu muftachim la'olam ba'avur kain. It doesn't make sense that every ger gets treated well because we were once ger. It's true, but the Ramban would say, okay, if you're a good ger, you have to be treated well. If you're a Rasha, you don't have to be treated well. Like, why should it be that gerim are a protected class? I think that's what we'd say nowadays, are a protected class forever because we were gerim in Eretz Mitzrayim. Why would that be? Why should that be? So says the Ramban, Upirish Rashi, Kihu tam lelo tonu oto yazhir shelo tone oto bahanaat dvarim im honito afhu yachol lahonatcha v'lomar lecha afata migerim bata mum shebecha al tomar lechavercha. Right? Rashi says the obvious thing. Well, if you're going to be mean to a ger, he's going to point out to you, well, you were gerim be'eretz Mitzrayim. Right? Don't say something bad about me when the same thing applies to you. Okay, is it the most compelling argument ever? The Ramban doesn't think so. Says the Ramban, V'hanachon be'einai. And this is a significant point in the Ramban, and I think it reveals not just his sympathy, well, his instinct to protect the lower class. Says the Ramban, Ki yomar lo toneger v'lo tilchatzenu v'tachshvu she'ein lo matzil miyadecha. Right? You might think, I'll be mean to the ger. Who's going to protect him? Ki ata yadata sheyitem gerim be'eretz Mitzrayim v'ra'iti et halachatz Hashem Mitzrayim lo chatzim etchem. But it's not just that you were gerim be'eretz Mitzrayim. I protected you. I came to help you, says the Ramban. There's a big difference. Va'asiti bahem nekama ki ani ro'eh dim'at ha'ashukim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I protected you and I saved you and I took revenge for you because I see the tears of the downtrodden. I see the tears of the persecuted. Ve'ein lahem menachem miyad oshkehem koach. They have no protector. Va'ani matzil kol adam miyad chazak mimenu. Says the Ramban in the Kila HaKadosh Baruch Hu saying it, right? I protect the lower class. I have that's what I do. V'chein ha'almana v'hayatom lo ta'anu ki eshmat sa'akatam shekol eila einam botchim bin nafsham v'alai yavtichu. Says the Ramban, it's not just that they're the lowest class, that they have no protectors. Says the Ramban, what do you remember from Mitzrayim? When you had no one else to cry out to, you cried out to me. And I answered you. Right? There's something about gerim that makes HaKadosh Baruch Hu want to respond to them. If you're a ger, you have no one else to cry out to. You're going to cry out to God. Upepasuk ha'acher hosif tam va'atem yidatem et nefesh hager ki gerim heitem be'eretz Mitzrayim kilomar yadatem ki kol ger nafsho shifala alav. Every ger feels like he's being, pushed down. V'hu ne'enach v'tzoek Ve'einav tamid el Hashem. Right? His eyes are always looking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'yirachem alav kasher yichem alechem. Right? What does it mean, remember that you were gerim be'eretz Mitzrayim? It's not just that you had it bad. It's that you had it bad, and therefore you cried out to God, and therefore He responded. And just like He responded to you, He's going to respond to current Gerim. And therefore you have to be really, really careful. Kimoshe katuv vaye'anchu b'nei Yisrael min ha'avodah vayitzaku v'tal shavatam el Elokim min ha'avodah kilomar lo bizchutam rak sherichem aleihem min ha'avodah. Right? In Mitzrayim, we didn't even call out to God. The sense you get, and the Rav said this, Mefarshim say this, Vayitzaku, we cried out like an animal cry. Vatal shavatam elokim, but God heard it. And says the Raman, God will always hear the cries of the Gerim because they have no one else to protect them. And so therefore you have to be especially good to Gerim because they need people to protect them. Happens to me, I'm going to the wedding of Gerim tonight. I'm very excited about it. This is a significant point in the Ramban and in all of our lives, to be good to Gerim. Unfortunately, it's something that I think the Rabbanut and Batei Dinim in Israel maybe are not as good as they could have been, but such is that. Okay, end of the Parsha. Something really, really interesting goes on at the end of the Parsha, and it's important to sort of get our sense for the flow of the Parshiot. Because again, what do we remember? We remember that Yisro was the Aseret HaDibrot, and then there was like a little piece at the end, and then it's Mishpatim. Then all of a sudden you come to Perek Chav Daled. Ve'el Moshe Amar Alei al Hashem Atav Aaron Nadav Avihu V'shivim Miziknei Yisrael V'ishtach Avitem Merachok V'nigash Moshe Levado El Hashem V'heim Lo Yugashu V'am Lo Yalu Imo. And then there's the Brit, right? There's the spilling of the blood. There's the telling of the story. V'yashkem Moshe V'yiven Mizbeach Tachar Ar Shteim Esrei Matzavel Shteim Asar Shiftei Yisrael V'yishlachat Narei B'nei Yisrael. What's all this doing here? But it's even stranger, because that's the beginning of Perek Chav Daled. But then in Pasuk Yud Bet of Perek Chav Daled it says, "Vayomer Hashem al Moshe alei elai hahara v'hayei sham ve'etana lachat luchot ha'aven v'atarav ha'mitzvah asher katavti l'rotam." What's the second parsha doing there? Right? When did the second parsha happen? There's two different dibrot. There's two different things going on. What is going on? And so the Ramban is going to explain everything to us brilliantly, and he's going to make the flow of the parshiot, which is critical that we remember. Right? Again, Mishpatim, it's not just some black hole of halachos. It's the transition from Aseres HaDibros, from Yisro to the Mishkan. Okay, that'll be next week. Says the Ramban, Vel Moshe Amar. So first he quotes Rashi. Parsha zo kodem Aseret HaDibrot ba'arba'a b'sivon ne'amralo. Says Rashi, coming back to the big machlokas of Yesh Muktam or Ein Muktam Muchar B'Torah. No, this happened beforehand. That's Rashi's pshat. Okay, there's a lot of questions to ask on that. In fact, like, why would the Torah change the order? But the Ramban disagrees. And first he's going to agree, again, shockingly and historically, with the Ibn Ezra. Ukvar heitivli wrote Rabbi Avraham, shepirei sha'inyan kisidro. Right? The Ramban thinks like the Ibn Ezra. No, the Torah is written in order. V'amar, ki adheina sefer abrit. Till now was a sefer abrit. V'hinei parshiot kulam ba'od kahogan. They're all in order. Ki achar matan Torah miyad bo bayom amar Hashem al Moshe ko tamar al bnei Yisrael atem ri'item kimin Hashem dibarti imachem. Right? The continuation of Maimed Har Sinai is immediately afterwards. V'itchil lachzor ulahazhir al avodat gilulim lo tasuniti Elohei chesed Elohei zahav v'tziva oto ve'ela hamishpatim asher tasim lifnehem v'chol hamitzvot habaot achrechen v'hishlim ba'azarat havodat gilulim sheimtzu ba'aretz ba'ovdea v'amar lo. Okay, says the Ramban, quoting the Ibn Ezra, but he agrees that no, the order is exactly that. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Aseret HaDibrot to Am Yisrael, but it didn't stop then. That was to Am Yisrael. Then he told Moshe all the things that he told them. Make a Mizbeach Adamah, and don't do Avodah Zarah. Ve'ele hamishpatim asher tasim lifneim, and the continuation. All that was on Vav Sivan, the day of Matan Torah. The Jews went back for a break, and Moshe stayed and got the rest of Yisro and all of Mishpatim until these psukim. Acharei tzivcha zeh lahem alei el Hashem atav Aaron v'hizkira parsha ki Moshe asa k'mitzvat Hashem uva la machaneh vayisaper lahem et kol divrei Hashem kasher tziva oto kol tamar el bnei Yisrael, etc., etc. Says the Ramban, after HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe the end of Yisro and all of Mishpatim, this is the narrative. Perek Chav Dalet Pasuk Aleph. Vel Moshe Amar Alei Al Hashem Atov Aaron Nadav Avihu. Now we need a covenant. Now we need spilling of blood, half and half, the usual how covenants work in the Torah. We need Na'aseh v'Nishma, and that's exactly what happened. That's a continuation of the story. This is on Zayin Sivan, the day after Matan Torah. So on Matan Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Moshe, let's say, Parshas Mishpatim. The next day, Moshe Rabbeinu, having written down everything the day before, tells it over to Klal Yisrael. They v'kiblu akol b'simcha v'amru kol asher diber Hashem na'aseh. We agree to everything. V'atam kol ha'divarim ha'eleh asher diber lecha Hashem na'aseh ki ma'aminim anachnu b'dvarecha ki Moshe siper b'mishneh Torah. What's he talking about? The pasuk there says, Va'at daber eleinu et kol asher diber Hashem Elokeinu elecha v'shamanu v'asinu. Right? We didn't have the strength to hear more from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What the Ramban is hinting at here is that in the discussion about what they heard at Har Sinai, maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu would have gone on. Right? Maybe he wouldn't have stopped at Lo Tachmod. He would have kept going. But Bnei Israel couldn't take it. So he said, Moshe Rabbeinu, you listen to the rest. So Moshe Rabbeinu listened to the rest. He listened to the end of Yisro, he listened to Mishpatim, and then he told it to us. And we were joyous, and we were happy, and we accepted it. Va'az kitava Moshe wrote it all down. V'hinei Moshe katav bayom ahu b'sefer kol ma shenistaveh chukim mishpatim v'torot. Moshe wrote it all down on Vav Sivan. V'hishkim baboker mimacharat hayom ahu. He gets up on Zayin Sivan. Lichrot lahem brit al hakol. For them to enter into a covenant on the Aseret Adibros and on Mishpatim. Uvana mizbeach v'zavach hazvachim v'natan chatzi adam al mizbeach Hashem v'chatzi ad sham ba'aganot. And he split the blood in half. Now you might ask me, what happened to that sefer? Right, so this ties into the machloket. Was the Torah given Megillot, or Chatuma? Right, according to Megillot. So Moshe wrote down what he got. At the end of the Torah, he put it all together and he made a Torah. According to the other verse, it's a little hard to understand what Moshe did. But he wrote it down, says the Ramban. V'kiblu alehem od lavo b'britimo, and they agreed and they came into a covenant with God. Amru kol asher diber Hashem na'aseh v'nishma elecha, v'chol asher titzaveh me'ito yitbarach. Okay, va'az zarak alehem chatzi adam ki zot ot habrit. Then he spilled the blood on them. Lavo hashnayim b'chalakim shavim. Right, equal part, half on the mizbech, half on Klal Yisrael. That's how you make a covenant. Va'acharei shehishlim ma'asav imahem hutzrach lemalot dvar Hashem. Okay, but after Moshe did this, now he had to fulfill what God had asked of him. She'amar lo Hashem alei atov Aaron, v'zeu she'amar vayal Moshe v'Aaron nadav avihu. That's the second part of Perek Chav Daled. The first 14 psukim discuss what Moshe did right after Maimad Har Sinai through Zayin Sivan. But then in the afternoon of Zayin Sivan, I'm making that up, I don't know what time, Vayom Hashem Moshe alei hahara v'yesham v'atnol lechat luchot ha'evim v'atorah mitzvah asher katav l'rotam v'yakam Moshe v'Yoshua misharto v'yal Moshe l'har ha'elokim v'lazekenim amar stay where you are in Aaron v'chur v'yechas hanan tahar v'yishkon kvod Hashem al Har Sinai. What's going on now? Says the Ramban. This is the first of the 40-day stays that Moshe is going to have on Har Sinai. Okay, that's why it says v'yesham. You're not going up, Moshe Rabbeinu wouldn't have known this. God says you're not going up just for a day. You're not going up just for a quick meeting. You're going up for an extended period of time. And because Moshe went up on the 7th of Har Sinai, and I'm trying to move it back to the narrative, because Moshe went up on the 7th of Sivan, 40 days later was Shivasar B'Tammuz. 40 days later was the breaking of the Luchos and the Chet HaEgel and the tragedy that's going to come later that we know so well. But it only works if he went up on the 7th of Sivan. And so the Ramban here is explaining the end of the Parsha, which is going to work into 40 days, the sin. 40 more days, come down again. 40 more days, Yom Kippur, forgiveness, and the Mishkan, according to the Ramban. But that we'll leave for another time. For now, Shabbat Shalom. Have a great week, and I'll see you next week.